Well, hello, fellow book lovers. My name is Roger, and welcome to my channel, Rogers Reads. So this is going to be the first part of my March wrap-up. I call it March, the Story Thus Far. And it goes only to the 15th of March, all the books that I've read up to that point. And then I'll do another video probably at the very end of March or beginning of April of the second part. So on to the wrap-up. Well, the first book that I read this month was The Hate You Give. Now, I know I'm a little late to the program here with this one, as I've been hearing a lot of gush and hype around this book. So I was a little worried about picking it up, because sometimes, the book and the hype aren't always in alignment. But that wasn't the case with this one. I just finished it, and it is an amazing story. So the story revolves around and is told from the point of view of Star Carter. Now, she's a 60-year-old girl, black girl, who is trying to live in two different worlds. One being Garden Heights, which is the all-black, somewhat crime-ridden neighborhood where she grew up in, and the other being Williamson Prep, the predominantly white upper-middle-class school that to which her and her brothers attend. Now, while at school, she is always very careful at measuring her behavior. She limits her slang, and tries to portray a easy-going attitude, go-with-the-flow type of personality as she tries to fit in with her rich white schoolmates. Star also has a great relationship with her family, and it's evident that she loves them. But things are not always easy for Star and her family. She lives in a neighborhood where drive-by shootings, drug lords, gang leaders, and turf wars are part of everyday life. But one night, her entire world is shattered when she and her childhood friend, Khalil, I think that's how it would be pronounced, they are pulled over by a policeman at a routine traffic stop. So the officer pulls Khalil out of the car, and even though Khalil was unarmed and made no threatening moves toward the officer, the policeman shoots him in the back 3 times, killing him. So Star ends up being the only witness to what actually happened, and her life and the life of those around her entirely change overnight as a result. Now, I will say that Khalil's murder in the story, the depiction of the murder, is horrifying and gut-wrenching, and regretfully not uncommon, as many of us have seen in the news far too often in our recent days. Still, that didn't make this part of the book any easier or less heartbreaking to read. So as a reader, we're fully immersed in the situation in this story, and we're placed in the shoes of all those who are directly involved. So in this way, the story was so raw and so real at times that I forgot that I was reading fiction. So following the aftermath of the shooting, I felt that the author did an excellent job of portraying the fear, the confusion, the rage, the mistrust that Star experiences as she processes her friend's brutal murder, and through it all tries to find herself and her voice in the middle of all that fallout. But not only that, we see firsthand how such a violent, tragic, and senseless loss can really shake a community to its core. So all in all, I felt that The Hate You Give was phenomenal. This is a brutally honest kind of book that'll stay with you for a long time after you read it, and perhaps cause you to look at life differently after having read it. At the very least, it gives us cause to question that which we've come to accept as normal in our society. So I gave this book 5 stars. I also read Brain on Fire this month by Susanna Cahalan, which was this month's read for my local book club. We usually meet every 4 to 6 weeks with a book. So this isn't a book that I would normally pick up, but I'm really glad I did. It's a nonfiction book, and it chronicles a young woman's descent from sanity to insanity in a matter of weeks. Now, let me read you the blurb. Okay, so here was the blurb for the book. When 24-year-old Susanna Cahalan woke up alone in a hospital room, strapped to her bed and unable to move or speak, she had no memory of how she'd gotten there. Days earlier, she had been on the threshold of a new adult life, at the beginning of her first serious relationship and a promising career at a major New York newspaper. Now she was labeled violent, psychotic, a flight risk. What happened? In a swift and breathtaking narrative, Susanna tells the astonishing true story of her descent into madness, her family's inspiring faith in her, and the life-saving diagnosis that nearly didn't happen. A fascinating look at the disease that could have cost this vibrant, vital young woman her life. So this story begins in the middle of our protagonist's normal life, and we follow her through her daily routine as we see her slowly begin to become taken over by this illness. So the story is horrifying how Callahan describes how she crossed the line between sanity and insanity because of a hellish disease. It's an unknown pathogen invaded her body and caused an autoimmune reaction that jump-started brain inflammation, paranoia, and seizures. So the feeling of being powerless draws our attention and begs to ask the question, what if this happened to me? And it happened slowly that the author had no idea that it was actually occurring. So the author here does an excellent job of presenting the fear and the emotional toll that mental illness can have on an individual. Now, I was surprised how gripping I found this book, and really I couldn't put it down. I was actually dreading sometimes the monthly reads at a book club. Sometimes I was going, I don't know if I'm going to like this one, and I kind of put it off until finally it's 3 days before book club, and I have to speed read it. But this one was different. The narrative was really well done and wasn't infused with technical jargon, technical medical jargon, and making it easy to understand and to relate to. I think I actually read the book in 2 sittings. It was intense and mesmerizing, and we felt like we were right there along with her as she went deeper and deeper into the darkness. The book was mind-bogglingly scary, but luckily it had a happy ending. I felt that it was an excellent human interest story, and I was really surprised how much it held my attention and kept me turning the page to find out what happened to this poor young woman. So I do recommend this book, and I think I gave it 4 stars. So the third book that I want to talk to you about is entitled Scythe by Neil Shusterman. Now, I already did a video review on this book, a lengthy one, 20 minutes or so, and I'll leave a link to it below. So this novel, Scythe, takes place in a utopian society in a future at a time in which hunger, disease, crime, and even death no longer exist. And once people begin to age, they can opt to go through a medical procedure called turning the corner, in which they can once again inhabit the body of a 21-year-old. Now, people who do end up getting killed from accidents or even murdered are only considered dead-ish. And immediately after their demise, these helicopters show up, whisk them away to these revival centers, where within a couple of days they're restored back to their former selves. So thus, the people in this new improved society are more or less immortal. Of course, humans still produce. And that being said, there needs to be some sort of population control. And that control falls under the jurisdiction of a legal authority called the scythedom, which is made up of individual scythes. Now, scythes are the only individuals in society that are permitted to take a human life. In fact, each scythe is charged with going out and eliminating a certain number of people every year. I think it was about 240, if my memory serves me right. Now, when a scythe kills someone, it's referred to as gleaning, and anyone who has been gleaned by a scythe can no longer be revived. They are dead for good. Now, the thing about scythes is that they must be of the highest moral discipline and possess qualities of empathy, humanness, and compassion. So as such, a scythe chooses their individual victims with careful consideration, allowing no bias, bigotry, or malice to enter into their decision for choice of victims. So in this novel, the story revolves around two specific main characters, a young woman named Citra and a young man named Rowan, who have been chosen to become scythe apprentices. So what follows is the adventures of these two go through as they train to be effective killers, compete with each other, and struggle with romantic feelings that emerged as they got to know each other, which, by the way, is a no-no, because romantic involvement with anyone else or even among scythes is strictly forbidden. So, all in all, I really liked these two characters and I enjoyed getting to know them as the story progressed. And as the plot moved forward, we learned that these two are actually quite complex and multi-layered characters, especially when they find themselves faced with some impossible changes throughout the book. Now, I mentioned this in my review video, but just when I had pretty much figured out the premise of the book and had a general idea where the story was going to take me, the author threw in a major wrench into the works that I did not see coming at all. At this point, the entire plot of the story changes and it veers off into these directions that I just couldn't have anticipated. I really love the twists and the turns and the surprises that the author threw into the story, adding even more layers to this already fascinating story. So all in all, this was a compelling story with excellent character development and world building. It's the kind of novel that gets you thinking, and it keeps you thinking about it for many days afterwards. So I absolutely love this story, and I gave it 5 stars. So the next book I want to talk about is an ARC that I actually received, and that was entitled The Odd Ling Prince, which is an enchanting fantasy novel which takes place in the kingdom of Caledon and revolves around 2 brothers, Prince Auric and Prince Alberic. Auric and Alberic, 1 human and 1 fae. So the kicker is that Prince Auric had no idea that his brother, Prince Alberic, even existed. And he certainly wasn't aware that he had a fae brother living in Elfland. So one day the king, King Bardic, the king of Caledon, is out riding with his son, Prince Auric, when out of nowhere a ring suddenly appears on the king's finger. So the ring is glowing bright, and no matter how hard him and the others try, the king is unable to remove it from his finger. So subsequently, the king falls ill, and it appears as though the ring is somehow killing him. His health continues to deteriorate to the point where he lay dying, and it's evident to everyone around him that he has perhaps only hours left to live. So all of a sudden, a beautiful young fae man just appears out of nowhere and is able to successfully remove the ring from the king's hand and thus saving his life in the process. So the young fae claims that he has given up his immortality to come here to save the king because of this, he can no longer return to his home, which was Elfland. The handsome fae then goes on to explain that his name is Alberic, and that King Bardic is actually his father. He then recounts a wild story about how the king ended up entrapped in Elfland and subsequently fathered a child, the fae Alberic. The king had no recollection of anything Alberic says, and believes the story to be false and outrageous, and denies any ties to the fae prince. So even though Alberic renounces any interest in the throne, claiming that all he wants is to be reunited with his father and his new brother, the king rejects him outright, and his contempt for him is pretty evident, in spite of the fact that Alberic saved his life. So as the days progress, the brotherly bond and brotherly love between the 2 young men grows stronger, while the king's hatred for the fae youth increases as well, to the point where Auric fears that his father might even slay his brother. But Auric, who feels his brother's anguish, vows to stay by his fae brother's side and help him to find his place in this new world for him. So what follows are numerous adventures involving bandits, magical horses, treachery, kingdom takeovers, heroism, mad rulers, and the appearance of lost relatives, leading to a fast-moving story with plenty of surprises. Now, the book is very well written, and it's written in an old fantasy style of writing, and accurately conveys how fear can build or destroy, and how it can take kind-hearted people and turn them into villains. But it's also about the power of the love of family and how that love can heal us no matter how far that we've descended into the darkness. Now, though there are a good number of action scenes in the book, and it is considered a fantasy novel, it's not really a warrior battling evil type of story. So you won't find a lot of warring and violence that you typically see in many fantasy novels. Rather, the Odd Ling Prince is more about emotional journeys than physical ones. So I absolutely loved everything about this book. And while I didn't want it to end, I felt that the conclusion was perfect. It was a kind of a conclusion that leaves you with a warm, fuzzy feeling at the end. Now, the book that I read was an advanced reader copy, an ARC copy, so it's not available for yet at the time of this recording, but it is scheduled to be released on May 25th, 2018. So if you enjoy fantasy with a touch of faith thrown in, this might be the perfect book to add to your TBR list. I gave this book 4 stars as well, and I really enjoyed it. So the next book I want to talk about that I read this month is Eleanor Park by Rainbow Rowell. So the story, the year is 1986. Eleanor is a new girl at school, and she has flaming red hair, and she wears men's clothes that are full of patchwork, and shall we say, are a bit out of the norm. She's a school outcast, and she's bullied at school because she's a big girl who wears very odd patchwork and crazy outfits. So the first part of the novel takes place on the bus, where she sits next to Park, a young man named Park, a somewhat geeky boy who's half Caucasian and half Korean. Now, days pass and they never talk to each other nor look at each other. Actually, there's a kind of a hostility between the two of them. Until one day, Park notices that Eleanor is discreetly reading comics over his shoulder. So he begins slipping her comics without saying a word, and with her always returning them the next day. So from this point of slipping comics to each other, the relationship begins to develop slowly, with Park creating mixed tapes for Eleanor. Not sure how many of you remember mixtapes. And then slowly starting to talk to each other about comics and about music. They both begin to look forward to the bus ride and to and from school, which is the only time that they really get to spend together. So I really loved watching the slow and tender relationship develop between them as they learned more and more about each other. So sitting and talking with Park is the one bright spot in Eleanor's life because she's kind of having a tough time of it. Not only is she bullied at school, someone is continuing to write these obscene messages on her school notebooks, but she lives at home with an abusive, controlling stepfather who barely provides enough for the kids' needs. So pretty much she and her siblings live in fear and poverty. Now, while at home, all her time is spent in her room, trying desperately to stay out of her stepfather's way, to keep low on his radar, who for some reason he seems to have it out for her. Now, Park is unaware of her situation as it's something that Eleanor never speaks of. Now, I really fell in love with these two characters who were both shy, awkward outcasts, and it was fun to observe their initial hostility to each other turn first into friendship and then into something deeper as they became more and more comfortable with each other. I felt the author did an excellent job of capturing that specialness and newness that we go through when experiencing love for the first time. I also enjoyed the format of the book in which the author switches back and forth via extremely short chapters between Eleanor's and Park's point of view so that we really get to know each of the characters and observe what makes them tick. So though this was a touching coming-of-age story of a sweet first love, it was also heartbreaking in places as we experience firsthand the horrendous home life that Eleanor had to endure. So in this way, it's the kind of story that'll make you laugh and cry. Now, Eleanor Park, it is a love story, but it also has many real-life issues thrown in. So while the romance between them was sweet, and I loved watching them fall more and more in love with each other, the story also dealt with several not-so-sweet themes, such as bullying, child abuse, child neglect, social pressures, and the negative self-images. So while it is a tender story of two teens falling in love, there's also plenty of conflict from the outside world that made the book heart-wrenching in parts. But the story had just enough hard and soft to make it perfect. That's to say, it was neither too mushy or too gritty. And I think I gave this book 4 stars. So the next book that I read is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alire Sáenz. I believe that's how he pronounced his name. Sorry, Benjamin, if I'm massacring it. So, Benjamin and Dante. The story takes place in the 1980s and introduces us to Aristotle, who goes by Ari, who's a somewhat sad, angry, and confused 15-year-old boy whose older brother is in prison and whose father, Vietnam veteran, is suffering from a really bad case of PTSD. Now, Ari feels disconnected from the members of his family. His father won't let anybody in too close to him. He keeps everybody kind of at a distance. And nobody ever mentions his brother. They all act as though he's dead. So one day at the local pool, Ari meets another Mexican boy, the same age as himself, Dante, who offers to teach Ari how to swim. And thus begins a deep and intense friendship between the two boys. Now, these two boys couldn't be more different. Now, Dante seems to have it all together, where Ari is confused and angry at being shut out by his family, but the relationship intensifies as they begin to discuss art, their Mexican heritage, their families, and their relationship to their parents. Now, each boy's relationship with their parents is also quite different. Now, Dante's relationship with his parents is more open and emotional, whereas Ari's is more distant and withdrawn. Although he does have a fairly good relationship with his mother, and I enjoyed reading the banter between the two of them. So they do have kind of a neat relationship. Now, Ari's father is by no means a bad dad. He's just trying to deal emotionally with the demons from a horrible period in his life, and a period that he simply wasn't ready to talk about or share with anyone. So the story is told from Ari's point of view, and we learn about his and Dante's relationship through Ari's eyes. Through Ari's eyes, we see how his view of the world is more pessimistic than Dante's, and though Ari does feel deeply, his emotions are much more guarded and secretive because of his pent-up anger and pain. Through Ari's eyes, we get to know Dante, who is much more optimistic and perhaps even leans more towards the naive. Now, though Ari often feels as though he doesn't quite understand Dante, he does feel a special connection to the boy and is fascinated, maybe even a little bit haunted by him. There's definitely something about Dante that makes Ari see the world quite a bit differently than he had prior to their meeting. So at some point, Dante then reveals to Ari that his feelings run a little bit deeper than those of mere platonic friendship. And though initially he was taken back, Ari decides that he does not want to lose Dante's friendship, and they continue moving forward. Now, the author did an excellent job of portraying what it's like to be a teen and in the closet, and the courage it takes to make that initial step in coming out. Now, this is not an action-packed thrill ride of a novel. Far from it. Rather, it's a slow-paced story that revolves around the feelings and thoughts of our two main characters, though the plot was peppered with small but consequential events through which we learned a little bit more about the boys, about their relationship to each other, and the relationship to their families. But this book, I felt it was a beautifully written coming-of-age story of two boys, their discovery of each other and the world around them. It's also a story about love, acceptance, courage, and about being true to your heart. So in this way, it's a powerful, character-driven story with a lot of heart, and I found myself utterly falling in love with these two characters. So all in all, I love Benjamin Alire Sáenz's writing. It's clear, it's evocative, with just the right amount of description. And the ending, oh my God, it was perfect, and quite a surprise as well. So Aristotle and Dante discovered the secrets of the universe was a subtle, blow-me-away type of book, and I'm still kind of mulling it over. You know, it's a kind of story that will make you tear up in some places and then smile like an idiot in others. And I did hear I read a rumor just recently, I think, that there's going to be a sequel to this novel. And if that's the case, I would definitely be the first to run to the bookstore and snatch me a copy. All that being said, I loved this phenomenal story, and I gave it 5 stars. So the last book I'm going to talk about is a book entitled By Your Side by Katie West. I was kind of excited about the premise of this story, in which 2 kids find themselves locked in a library for an entire weekend. And that's kind of what initially attracted me to this story. So I guess I kind of expected a bookish romance. But really, this story had very little to do with books or the library, and I was a little bit disappointed by that. So the story revolves around Autumn, who finds herself accidentally locked in the library for an entire weekend with the school bad boy, Dax Miller. Now Autumn, she doesn't know very much about Dax, except that he's trouble. Between the rumors about the huge fight that he was in, which led to a brief stint in the Juvie for him, his reputation as a loner, he's not exactly the type of person to be stuck with, locked in a building with for a whole weekend. So instead, it becomes clear that Autumn is going to have to spend the next couple of days living off of vending machine food and making conversation with a boy who clearly wants nothing to do with her. But of course, there is more to Dax than meets the eye, and the two of them slowly begin to open up to each other. But then the weekend is over, and they're rescued. And now we get to see whether the relationship can survive once they get back to normal life. Unfortunately, I have to say that this book really didn't do it for me. Now, to be fair, the story or the writing wasn't bad at all, and this book has generated many 5-star reviews. Apparently, many fans of Casey West really love this story, but it just wasn't for me. Now, I have to admit that the bad boy with the tragic past is one of my least favorite tropes, right up there with love triangles, both of which were present in this book. I also felt that her friends were way over the top clueless. So in that way, the story felt kind of unrealistic to me. I mean, really? Can people be that clueless? Now, I did enjoy the banter between Dax and Autumn, however, and I liked the chemistry between the two of them. I also liked the anxiety angle to the storyline. But all in all, it just didn't feel like that strong of a story to me, and there weren't any real surprises that I felt or freshness in the plot. I also didn't feel any emotion while reading the story, and as such, the characters felt kind of flat for me, I guess. So, By Your Side didn't work that well for me personally. The book wasn't horrible by any means. It was an enjoyable, light, fluffy read. It just didn't knock my socks off. And I ended up giving this book 3 stars. Okay, I think I'm going to stop here for now. I'll do part 2 of the March wrap-up at the end of this month or at the beginning of April. So if you liked this video, I'd really appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up. Also, I'd appreciate it if you consider subscribing to the channel if you'd like to get notified when I get more videos released. And again, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.